This is the Facts of Life, where research-based knowledge from the Family and Consumer Sciences is brought to you with life applications. I'm your host, Amanda Harner.
And I'm Hope Smith, a family and consumer science educator and the graphic guru of the pod.
Our guest today is Radon educator, Derek Cooper. And these are the facts on radon and lung cancer.
Let's just dive into it. So,
Okay.
Derek is a very interesting person.
I totally agree. I was not expecting him to be as fascinating as he actually is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Listening to this podcast has opened up my eyes to the world of what all extension does in a way that, like, I work for extension and it's still every day I learn something new.
Yeah, it's been shocking to me in my first year here just how many layers there are just to family and consumer sciences alone, not to mention all the other areas of extension.
Right. I think at some point you said in the podcast that, like, there was still so much for you to learn about radon. I don't think I realized anything about the radon project in Georgia. I don't think I knew anything about really even understanding kind of the depths of what radon does and how it affects our health. And so I really gained a lot from listening to this podcast over and over and over again while editing.
Right. I think I've listened to this podcast more than any other one. It was the one that went so smoothly that I was like, oh, there's going to be minimal editing.
Right. This one has
Psych.
definitely been my favorite.
Mine too so far, yeah. What was super fun about this interview for me was it was very personable, like meeting his dogs and, well, one of his dogs, but there were other dogs. But the sad thing to me is that Derek is unfortunately leaving UGA. But it's for a good reason. It's because his wife is going to start her residency, but we're going to be very sad to see him go.
Definitely. He's a great asset to UGA and to Extension. So today we're talking with UGA radon educator Derek Cooper to learn more about how to reduce our risk of lung cancer from radon. He has been the radon educator for 4 years now at UGA. He has a master's degree in public health with a focus on environmental science.
Is it just a focus on environmental science, or was there also a focus on radon and lung cancer?
My capstone project was on radon. So
for people who don't maybe understand what a capstone project is, can you tell us what that is?
yeah, so the program, like the master's program, wanted us to have this integrated like learning experience where we would get real world work. And so for mine, because I was already working with the radon program while I was getting my master's, I did a special project. And that special project was partnering up with the Georgia Public Library System.
Oh, nice.
And we're getting these actually electronic radon monitors. Hopefully in the next few months, we'll be launching them in the libraries for checkout to the public. So anyone with a library card could go to their local library, check one out with their library card, test their home, and then bring it back. And then the next person can come and check it out. So it makes it a little more accessible and easy to test your home.
I love that. I had no clue that you were doing that. So that's actually super exciting to hear about. So I'm glad I asked that question. Derek, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because, as I've already told you, I have a lot to learn about radon. It's a subject that I don't know a whole lot about, but it is something that is an issue in our community in Monroe County, Georgia. That's part of why I'm excited to have you on, because it helps fill in some blanks for me. One of the other things that you told me about yourself that I thought was really cool, that I'm very excited about, is you have converted an old bus that you and your wife use for traveling, right?
Yeah, when we got engaged, we were talking about the ring, and we decided instead of getting an engagement ring that I would buy my wife an engagement school bus, and we, for about 5 years, spent time converting it into a home that we can use to travel in on weekends, go to parks around Georgia and stuff like that. And so we take it on little weekend trips, and we have a little home and a school bus now.
That is so, I had no idea that it was in placement of an engagement ring.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
My husband and I had done a lot of research because I had told you when I found this out that I have friends who have done this they have a schoolie. They're on, I think, their second schoolie.
Yeah.
And they've started making toilets that are a little prettier for the schoolie and everything.
Oh yeah, it can be expensive, and we did everything ourselves. So we had to learn how to install, electric, learn to be plumbers, learn to put in flooring, put up walls, put up the ceilings, build cabinets. So it was just like, and then we had to learn to do mechanical work on the diesel engine. So it's a big undertaking. It's cool to know all that stuff, but
yeah,
can get pricey and it takes some time, but
yeah. Oh, but it's such a good learning opportunity, but you have to know what you're actually getting yourself into. Otherwise, it's not a worthwhile investment. So
yes. Watch a lot of YouTube videos on how to do those things.
Yeah. Okay, so back to Radon. If anybody needs schoolie information, we know who to contact. So just let me know and I'll send you on to Derek. So radon is why we're really talking today. And radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer in the United States. It is, and is that true worldwide too, actually? Okay.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Primary cause for people who are non-smokers. And that is really important to know that I think a lot of times we tend to think that lung cancer just doesn't happen to anybody unless you've been living with a smoker or you are a smoker. Let's start with what is radon, because some people just don't know what radon is.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the thing about smoking too, because there's a lot of stigma behind lung cancer. A lot of people think if you got lung cancer, it's your fault because they associate it as like a smoker's disease, and it's much more than that. And that influences the funding around lung cancer research. So it's important to recognize that there are more than just one cause of lung cancer, and we need to treat everyone as if it's serious, and just make sure we're making good health for all. So really good point there. But on a basic level, radon is a radioactive gas, and it is present pretty much everywhere in the world. It comes from the breakdown of uranium, which naturally occurs in a lot of soil and rock. In much of Georgia, the culprit is going to be the kind of granite from the Piedmont region that is below the entire north half of Georgia, on the fall line and north of that. However, we have seen high radon levels south of that, so it's not the only natural source of uranium that's in the soil there. In other parts of the country, it's basaltic rock or shales, or even industrial waste that's contaminated with uranium can be releasing radon. So there's a lot of different sources for it, but it comes from that uranium. And as the uranium breaks down, it releases the radon gas. And now uranium is a solid, so it's pretty well contained in the soil underneath our homes. But when it breaks down to the gas, it starts to rise, and it can come to the surface. And if it comes up under a home, it can seep inside and eventually build up to high levels and increase your risk for lung cancer.
And that's a very important piece to know, that it is naturally occurring, and we tend to try to focus on that in our education in UGA, right?
Because it's naturally occurring, it's no one's fault. It's pretty random where it ends up. And so it is just everywhere. And even outside, there's going to be some radon gas in the outdoor air. But it's really only risky if it builds up into high levels inside of our homes, because we can trap it inside on accident.
By the same token, you also mentioned that there can be radon that is produced because of waste. But that's, even though that happens, that's not what we want people to fixate on.
Right. The radon from waste issue is really limited to like certain industrial waste that like is used to build the foundation of a home. So it's not very common at all. Most of what we find in Georgia is really just this natural granite rock that can be anywhere from just below your home to hundreds of feet under your home, producing that radon gas.
Other than lung cancer, are there other health concerns that the public should be aware of connected with radon?
So that's a really good question. There are pretty much no other health effects other than lung cancer. About 21,000 people a year die of radon-induced lung cancer in the US. It's estimated that there are maybe 11 radon induced gastric cancers from consuming radon contaminated water, but this is so much rarer. Actually, the bigger risk from radon contaminated water is that when we're like showering or doing laundry, the gas comes out of the water and then we breathe it, and that's much more risky than consuming the water itself.
Okay, so repeat that part again, because I think that's something that people don't really understand. And that is, I personally think, a very key point. So repeat what the risk with water is, please.
Yeah, so we find that about 1 in 15 homes has a high level of radon, but in much of Georgia, we're riskier than that.
Do you happen to know what that statistic is for Georgia?
Yeah, I would say in most of the Piedmont region, so like anywhere on the fall line or north of it, it's about 1 in 5 homes that is high for radon. And in some areas, it'll be closer to 1 in 10, and in some areas, it'll be closer to 1 in 2. So it varies with the geology, but we're definitely at a high risk for it in the state. With radon in air, the EPA's standard guidance is anything between 0 and 2 picocuries per liter is nothing to be concerned about. Just continue testing every 2 years. Anything between 2 and 4 picocuries per liter, they say you may consider taking actions to reduce your radon level. Most don't take action in this range, or they choose to retest to get a more defined answer on what the radon level is. And then anything above 4, you definitely want to take action to reduce your radon levels. Now, picocuries per liter is just our measure of radioactive decay, basically how many times the radon is breaking down in the air around us. And so that's kind of our standard for measurement. And a little more perspective on EPA's numbers. In the European Union, they regulate radon to 2.7 picocuries per liter, whereas we regulate it to 4 picocuries per liter. Part of that is because no level of radon is technically safe. And the research, just different scientists have set different standards for where you should fix your home. So that's like a little perspective on your guidance for whether or not you're comfortable with the radon level in your air. Another thing to consider too is that if you have a history of smoking or exposure to smoke or secondhand smoke, essentially radon is much more dangerous. If you also have a history of smoking, the risk is not like 1 + 1 = 2, it's like 1 + 1 = 6. It's multiplicative. And so the two combined are much more dangerous than either individually. And so you may be more cautious about your radon levels if you do have a history of smoking. Now, if we turn to radon in water, it is also measured in picocuries per liter. However, we find those numbers to be a lot higher than the radon levels in our air, and that's okay. with radon and water, anything above 4,000 picocuries per liter is where we start to consider it elevated. This is because it takes about 10,000 picocuries per liter of radon in our water to raise the radon levels in our air 1 picocurie per liter. So again, that's 10,000 picocuries per liter in our water to raise the radon levels in our air 1 picocurie per liter. So with radon and water, people are generally starting to consider fixing it if it is above 4,000 picocuries per liter. And then you definitely want to do something above 10,000 picocuries per liter, because you are able to start to significantly raise the radon levels in your air when you get to that number.
So let's give an example, because that was a lot of information to digest.
Yes.
I feel like that with the air is a little more straightforward. So let's focus on the water. So let's say somebody does a water test that tests for 4,000, and they're like, well, we're not ready to actually take action yet. We know that it's not a concern, but it's not like putting us at serious risk for lung cancer at that point. But let's say they tested a year later and now it is at 10,000. And we now know they've also done an air test, and their air test was at 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And so now we know that air test could go up to 4 because there's 10,000 in the water.
Right.
That's where we're saying now you probably really truly do need to take action more quickly.
Right. Exactly. We have a graph that I show people during presentations often of somebody who has 80,000 picocuries per liter of radon in their drinking water, or just in their well water. And we have data from a continuous radon monitor that measures the radon in their air once an hour. And the radon in their air hovers around 4, but every time they take a shower, it goes up to 12 because of that 80,000 picocuries per liter in the radon in their drinking water. So that is kind of a good example of when, oh, this is a really serious issue that we need to fix. In our radon and air tests do generally capture the elevated levels from usage of our drinking water, as long as we're using those things during the test. And so in that case,
you kind of want to run the test when you're using the home the way that you normally would be using it. So it's not like you want to be like, oh, I'm going away for vacation for 5 days. Now's a great time to run this test.
Exactly. You want to have your air conditioning or your heat set to what it would normally be and be using your home regularly. Now, you don't want to prop the doors and windows open, because then you're letting all the radon and gas out during the test. But you do want to use your home as normal. One option I will say is if people are riding the line between low and high on their air and they're trying to figure things out, you might consider doing a long-term radon test. You can get them from the National Radon Program. Their website is sosradon.org. They're $27, so they're a few bucks more than our tests, but they measure for a minimum of 90 days. Because of that, they're capturing a much broader period of time and getting a better average. So because of that, they're more accurate. They're going to better encapsulate whether or not the radon in your water is affecting the radon levels in your air. And so they're in a lot of ways more ideal, but they have the downside of taking a minimum of 90 days to complete. Yes, the risk with radon and water is breathing the air in your home after the radon has been released from the water, not from drinking the water itself. Drinking water with radon in it is not particularly risky. which is why we emphasize usually if someone is testing their home and their home tests high and they have a well, you should definitely test your well for radon. However, if your home tests low and you have a well, you don't really need to worry about your well because it's not impacting the radon levels in your home.
So, I mean, and I heard you say like there are some connections and some research that would demonstrate an association with some gastric cancers, but that evidence is not nearly as strong or concerning as the release of it becoming a gas again with the water.
Right.
Okay.
Like current estimates are that there might be 11 deaths a year from drinking radon contaminated water and 21,000 deaths a year from breathing radon in the air. So it's really completely different things. Radon in your air is the main concern. It's also odorless and colorless and tasteless. So it's not something that we're sensing in our everyday lives. It doesn't exacerbate. Is it a
dog?
Come on. Yeah.
All right, so this part was really hilarious because this is where the mailman comes and Derek's dogs go insane. But we get to meet Almond.
People who are listening on Spotify don't get to see the puppies, but
yeah. Sorry, guys. We were talking about radon and water.
With the water testing, the main thing to focus on is that it still is a concern for lung cancer because it releases as a gas.
Yeah.
Is that something that, this is probably going to sound like a stupid question, but in my mind, I'm like thinking periodic table, chemicals, things, heating, all that stuff. Yeah. So, does the temperature of the water matter?
That's a great question.
Okay.
It doesn't change the breakdown rate that much. The main issue is that like with our wells, especially deep drilled wells, they are in like often contact with the granite rock underground. So the water is in direct contact with the rock. The rock releases the radon gas directly into the water, and then it pumps up into our homes. And the radon is still a gas at that point. It's just suspended in the water. So as soon as we're like doing laundry and sloshing it around or turning on our shower and aerating it, the radon just comes out of the water and gets into the air.
So is it fair to say that part of what's going on in the well is that it's trapped? I mean, it's the same idea that when we're actually doing the God, what's it called? You know, when you drill the holes,
like drilling or boring the well.
Yeah, to like release the gas from the house when you're actually like it starts with an R.
Wait, like an aeration system?
No, like the what is it called when you're actually dealing with the problem?
Mitigation. There we go.
Start with an R. Starts with an N.
We got there.
Yeah, we got there. So it's almost like a natural mitigation that's happening because it's sending it out of the well where it's trapped and releasing it into a larger space because gas is going to fill whatever space it has available to it.
Right. So like the gas wants to get out of the water. It just can't down in the well because it's all that's there is water. And so the gas is released right into it. And so when the water gets to the surface where there's more air, it wants to come out of that water. And so like part of that is why when we're doing the radon in well water tests and we get our sample, we can't have an air bubble in the sample. Because if we do, when we uncap it at the lab, the radon gas comes out in that air bubble immediately. So exactly, it wants to get out into the air, basically.
Okay, that that clarifies things so much for me.
Yeah, and that's why radon really isn't an issue in like public water, because it's often at the surface for a fair amount of time, and it runs along a pipe for such a long amount of time that the radon gas comes out of the water before it ever gets to a home.
Okay.
So like public or city water is not an issue. It's just these wells that serve either a private home or just a few homes.
If you're aware that a neighbor has tested high and you haven't, is it fair to say that maybe you should be more cognizant all the time in the future and test more regularly, because it would be an indication that there is a need for it to be releasing nearby?
Right. Like the source is there. Yeah, we recommend testing every 2 years or after any sort of major renovation or earthquake. So an earthquake can change the geology under our home. Test every 2 years to make sure that our home remains safe. And if we do a major renovation on our home, it can dramatically change the airflow in our home, and that'll affect the radon levels.
Does the type of home you have influence radon levels, I should say?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I often, when I'm giving talks, I ask people if they think a home with a basement is more likely to have a high level of radon, and almost everyone says yes. And that's actually not the case. Radon can be elevated in any type of home, whether it's a home on a crawl space, on a slab, or with a basement. Really, the only type of home that is very low risk is a home on piers that's above the ground. So it's really important. Any type.
So tree houses are the future.
Yeah, tree houses are the future.
Nice.
Yeah. You can actually build a home radon resistant, and I can talk about that a little later. But really any type of home can have a high level, so every home should be tested.
Good to know. Yeah. So if somebody's neighbor, let's say their home tests high for radon and it's at a concerning level, what should we be aware of as neighbors? Like, should we be concerned about our home? What does that communicate to us?
Yeah. When radon is released from the rocks and soil under our home, it's going to come up to the surface a lot like a spring of water, where it's going to follow the cracks and gaps of least resistance leading up to the surface. And that can either put that kind of spring of radon up directly underneath one of our homes, or it can put it out into, a field by our home, or just out into the open air. The risk is when it comes up directly under our home. So if your neighbor tests high for radon, your home may also test high, but it could just be that the spring leads up to their home and doesn't lead up to your home. Or it could be the spring of radon leads up to both of your homes. So whether or not your neighbor tested high doesn't actually have a huge amount of bearing on whether your home itself is going to test high. I would just recommend that every house test. I have seen one house test at 20 picocuries per liter and the house next to it test at 1. So it is very house to house dependent, and just each home should test.
Okay, so I think this is a good place to talk more about like what are the things that make our homes most susceptible? How is it coming in? And you kind of hit on some of those. I mean, we've established it's a gas. A gas is always going to seek to fill the entire space. If you go back to like basic chemistry, right? You have your gas, liquid, and solid. Gases and liquids are going to fill a container.
Right.
They are. And a gas is going to fill a container even more so. It's not like, I mean, has more capacity to, I guess, like if you think about when something's flooding, it's only going to go so high, but a gas is going to fill the entire space. So thinking in those terms, if we're talking about radon, that is a gas, and it's always trying to get out and fill that space, then it makes sense that certain natural disasters, I mean, you mentioned earthquakes, which only makes sense, it's going to potentially mess the foundation, but there are other natural disasters that could damage a foundation.
Right.
I mean, you could have hurricane, you could have tornadoes. We've had some tornadoes recently in Georgia. Obviously, hurricanes are an issue on our coast and can be a concern inland with the high winds and all that kind of stuff. Those are all things that can shift foundations and stuff. And you also mentioned renovations, because obviously a renovation is going to open things up and then kind of close it again. So the question is like, did something shift? Did we find a new airway? Did something not get sealed well? I mean, and it could actually make it better, but it could make it worse. What are the things that we need to be extra cautious of as homeowners?
Yeah, in terms of radon entry, so almost every home has a lower air pressure in the lowest level of the home versus the air underneath of that home. And that's because of using our heat and air conditioning and oven and fans and everything in our home. And so we have that lower air pressure in the lowest level of our home compared to the air underneath of our home. And because of that pressure differential, our home tends to suck on the ground underneath. Our home is like a vacuum, and it pulls soil gas up into the home. And so because of that, if we have spaces that radon can get through, it will try to get through those spaces. And so if you have, like, for instance, cracks in your slab, radon may enter through those. Gaps around pipes servicing your home can be a point of radon entry, like your water pipes coming in. You can have gaps between foundation walls or porous cinder block walls in your basement. You can have basically gaps in the subfloor underneath your home. There are a lot of different ways that radon can kind of eke its way in, and it's impossible to fully seal up all of them. But the more airtight we can get our home down on the bottom, the fewer entry points we have for radon.
I think we've established the importance of testing, and that would be our first kind of takeaway for our audience. Is it, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, whether you're in Georgia or not in Georgia, but especially if you're in a state that, or in an area of a state that tends to lend itself to higher levels of radon, test. And testing is super easy. At UGA, through UGA Extension, we offer 2 different kinds of tests, right? Can you talk about those?
So we offer short-term radon and air tests, and then we also offer radon and water tests. The short-term radon and air tests are usually what we ask people to start with when they're testing their home for radon gas. It is essentially a paper envelope that has some activated carbons or charcoal in it, and you hang it in your home, in the lowest level of your home that you live in, for 3 to 7 days. When you're done, you send it off to the laboratory, and the laboratory should give you a result in about a week on your radon levels. So it's a really simple way to do a radon test. If you buy one online from Extension, the cost is $15. If your local Extension office carries those test kits, the cost is $10 to pick one up at the office. So they're a great way to get your like baseline level of radon in your home. The radon and water test is a little bit different. We generally only recommend these tests to people who are living in a home with a private well. And they cost $30 for the test and $10 to overnight it to our laboratory. And they measure the radon in your well water and let you know if it is influencing the radon levels in your air, or if it could influence the radon levels in your air.
So part of the advantage that I'm taking away from this, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have a private well and you're testing your well and you're testing the air in your home, let's say the air in your home is coming back, no problem. Yeah. But you're testing your well and you're finding, hey, it's really high. The reason that it's a good idea to test then becomes, hey, we can cut this off before it even enters the home and becomes a health risk.
Right. Because you can basically fix radon in your well water before it ever gets used in your home with something called an aeration system. And so like it basically bubbles the water coming out of your well and releases the radon gas out in the open air outside before the well water gets to the home. And that way you won't be doing things like doing a load of laundry or taking a shower and releasing that gas into the home where you could then breathe it.
Okay, this is, I see this connection, but I feel like a good kind of takeaway or a way to relate this is, if we have good nutrition habits on a consistent, regular basis, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll never have any health issues, but we can greatly reduce our possibility of having serious health consequences, like cardiovascular disease or our risk for type 2 diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. So in a sense, that's the point of testing a well. It's not that it's going to be causing serious cancers in your gut and that kind of thing. It's highly unlikely. But it's more about saying, hey, if we can prevent it from actually ever even getting in the home and mitigating that risk even further, it's better.
Right. And it reduces our risk for lung cancer. One of the things about radon that is frustrating is that no level of radon is safe. Any radon that you breathe is technically increasing your risk for lung cancer. However, even if I were to go outside my home and breathe that air, there's some radon in the air outside just because it's naturally occurring. It exists everywhere. So it's all about finding that line to be as safe and healthy as possible, as is reasonable in our homes. And you talk about nutrition, and that's perfect. There is no perfect diet or perfect way to live that means that you will have no health risks at all. But the more you do to make your indoor air more healthy, the more healthy of a life you can live.
Awesome. I'm getting my health tested after this, right?
I can send you a test kit. I'll send you the survey so we'll mail you one.
Sounds good. My husband's a loan officer, and so you guys do a thing, continuing education for real estate agents. And so sometimes when I'm aware that you guys have one of those coming up, I will pass it along to my husband so that he can make other connections with real estate agents. It's an opportunity for him. I personally think like this is a different, interesting opportunity for them that they don't always have the opportunity to participate in?
Yeah. Real estate agents have like a really diverse array of knowledge when it comes to radon, where some have dealt with it in a lot of transactions and some haven't ever dealt with it at all. It can be really important though, because as part of a home inspection, often you have the option to add a radon test to it. It's not something that is required by law in Georgia or something that you have to do. But if a buyer does pay for it and finds radon gas in high levels in the home, they may ask for mitigation after or during the due diligence period to be one of like the qualifications for purchasing the home. So it's an important thing for real estate agents to know about. We recently last year became an approved real estate school, so we can start teaching these CE classes. So essentially, if any real estate agents want to have a class like this or host a class like this, they can reach out to the program and we can teach a 3-hour CE on radon that goes over what is radon, how do we test for it, how do we deal with it in real estate transactions, and basically how do we find qualified people to fix it, so that both the buyer and the seller are satisfied with the resolution.
We're not saying if radon is found in a home that you're trying to buy, don't buy it, or try to shed your home as soon as you find out that there's radon in it. We're saying there is a process called mitigation, and it is very effective. So can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, so radon mitigation very effectively reduces radon levels in the home down to a more safe level for us to live in. Radon takes years and years and years of exposure to increase our risk for lung cancer. And so it doesn't mean that if you have tested for radon and the home tests high, that you need to panic and go find a mitigator immediately. You want to do a retest to confirm that the levels are high so that you know that you're doing the right thing and getting the mitigation system, and then pursue mitigation and get a few quotes with it. With mitigation, remember how we talked about earlier in the conversation about how in the lowest level of our home, the air pressure is lower than the air underneath of our home. And because of that pressure differential, our home kind of sucks on the ground underneath and acts like a vacuum. Radon mitigation intends to reverse that pressure differential. So what a contractor does is they come to your home and they drill essentially a 3 or a 4-inch hole into the slab in your home, down into the dirt underneath, dig out like a gallon of dirt or so, and they put a pipe into that hole. The pipe is routed outside your home at ground level, and it goes up the side of the home, and it looks like a lot like a drain pipe from a gutter. And then a fan is installed in it, and the fan runs 24/7. And on a simple level, it's sucking the radon gas out from under our home and venting it above the roof line. But on a more complex level, by sucking on all the air underneath our home, it's lowering the air pressure underneath our home. And by doing that, we have reversed our pressure differential. And instead of our home sucking on the ground sucks on our home. And it fixes almost every radon issue that's caused by radon coming up from underneath the home. A mitigator can install this in less than a day usually. So it is not a fix where you have to like vacate your home and do all this stuff. And the only maintenance the system really needs is if the fan breaks. They generally last about 10 to 15 years. It needs to be replaced. And just like any other home, you would test your home every 2 years to make sure radon levels remain low. And so it can take a home that has a high level of radon and make it just as safe as a home that has naturally low levels of radon. During a real estate transaction, I often compare it to a home with a leaky roof. The repair cost is probably pretty similar. A mitigation system on average is about $1,200 to $1,500 to have a professional install it. Similar cost to a lot of roof repairs, but just because a home has a leaky roof, it doesn't mean you wouldn't buy it. You would just fix it. And it's the same with radon.
Very good point. I like that. And it's encouraging to know that it's even though radon can have a very serious health consequence, it is very easy to find a solution to deal with it. Like, that's not every thing that comes up as a health risk for people. So hopefully people take away from this that that's encouraging. If you're a renter, would it be better for you to test your own rental property every 2 years, or should you push for your the owner of that rental property to do it for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, if you're in a renting situation, I'd recommend reaching out to the landlord and saying, hey, I just learned about radon gas. I'd like to test the home just to make sure the home is radon safe. And I was wondering if it was okay if I did a short-term test, or if you wanted to do the test yourself or hire someone to come do the test. That way the landlord is not blindsided by it. If you do test high and feel like, you just don't want to blindside the landlord. You want to let them know about it. We have no laws on it in Georgia, though, so the landlord isn't necessarily obligated to do anything about it. I think most will if they find out that their home has a high level of radon. But the first step would be to contact the landlord and let them know and say that you'd like to test, and kind of go from there to figure it out. I've had a lot of people refer their landlords to me if their landlords don't know anything about it. That way I can talk through with them what radon is, what the fix is, why it's important to test in Georgia, and that sort of thing. So it's important to approach them early on in the process rather than late.
Some of the extension agents may be able to take some of that edge off and help explain it to a landlord. And if we feel that the conversation needs to go to Derek, we could take it a step further. And extensions throughout the country can have different programs and function differently. Do you know if the other extensions have radon programs?
Yeah, so some of them do. EPA has a program called SURGE, which is the State Indoor Radon Grant. And they have a SURGE program in every state. And some states they're run through the Department of Health, and some states they're run through groups like Extension.
Okay.
So some extension services do, and for some you contact your Department of Health. So
if you are in another state, you can seek out your extension office. They may be able to tell you where to go if they cannot help you. But your health department is another place where you can go and try to find out what steps to take.
Yeah, and in most states, if you Google your state name and then radon program, the state radon website will come up.
You showed at the beginning a digital test that in Georgia, we're working on getting it into libraries, into the library system, which I love. I think that's really cool. And might actually be a good idea for other states. Like, if look into whether or not your state has some sort of similar program, and if they don't, maybe be an advocate for that.
These tests that we're using for the libraries are just radon. You can actually buy one on your own for like $150 online if you wanted one in your own home. So they're not super expensive if you just want to have a continuous monitor in your home. But there are some that are a combination, radon, carbon monoxide, VOCs, so you can monitor all of the indoor air things in your home.
Is there anything else that you feel needs to be mentioned?
The best time to test is generally the winter, because radon levels tend to be highest when we're using the heat in our homes.
Okay.
But every 2 years is the general standard.
Okay. Cool. I feel like we've covered everything.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, I could talk for like 3 hours on this, so I'm not going to put
Okay.
you through that. I'm not going to put you through that.
Thank you so much, Derek. Really appreciate it. And I learned a lot today. Hopefully a lot of other people did. It definitely filled in some blanks for me that I needed to have filled in. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. It was a fun conversation.
Research-based resources referenced in and related to this episode of Facts of Life podcast can be found in the episode notes and description.
The views and thoughts expressed in this video podcast are the speaker's own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of Georgia or the guest organizations and/or employers. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The University of Georgia name, as well as those of guest organizations, and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. These are the facts of life. Thanks for joining us. Check out our website at monroefacs.extension.uga.edu. That's Monroe, FACS.extension.uga.edu.